You have surely seen this face on t-shirts, signs, keychains, mugs, or somewhere else. If you did not know who it was, you might assume it was some kind of rock star or perhaps a movie actor. But of course, not knowing who Che Guevara is simply impossible. Today we will talk about this man and how he managed to end up on those t-shirts. Let's begin with the fact that Che is not his real name. It is an Argentine interjection that roughly means, hey buddy, or hey bro. The nickname was given to him by Cuban revolutionaries. They were very amused by the outsider from Argentina who kept walking around constantly saying, Che Che. An interesting point. By American standards, Guevara's origins could be called aristocratic. Che's ancestors owned large plantations in Argentina in the 16th century and in the early 19th century in California. Che's father was not poor either. He had his own yerba mate plantation. Interestingly, the great revolutionary, through one branch of his family, descended from noble Irish aristocrats. His father's surname was Guevara Lynch, so Che grew up hearing stories of two revolutions, the Spanish and the Irish. 1943, another military coup takes place in Argentina. Guevara is 15 years old at that moment. His best friend, older than him, comes to him and invites him to student protests. And here, the schoolboy Guevara says, "So do you have a revolver? If not, I'll stay home. What, am I, an idiot? The police will beat you unarmed people, and that will be the end of it." He did not believe in nonviolence. His older companion was named Alberto Granado, and he had a major influence on young Che. The boy became interested in leftist ideas early, Marx, Lenin, Bakunin, and so on. Guevara in his youth generally loved burying himself in books. Since childhood, he suffered from severe asthma attacks. As a result, he spent a lot of time at home in the enormous family library. He read absolutely everything, from Russian classics in translation to Baudelaire in the original. At the same time, it would be wrong to consider him a bookworm. Like a normal young aristocrat, he played golf, shot well, and in rugby, he could have made quite a career. But becoming a rugby player was not his destiny. In 1952, he sets off on a great journey. He wants to see how leper colonies are organized in other countries. Guevara, in his final year of medical university, is invited by Alberto Granado to come along. For Che, this is not his first motorcycle expedition. He had already traveled around Argentina alone. And so these two ride an old pre-war Norton motorcycle all across Latin America, living either in a tent or at hospitals where they work part-time. Chile, Peru, Colombia, Venezuela. In 9 months, they cross the entire continent. When the motorcycle breaks down, they walk. They ride on horseback, float on rafts, hire themselves out as sailors, not a single day without adventure. Along the way, Guevara sees with his own eyes how Latin America lives, and it lives very badly. Everywhere there is hunger, poverty, disease, and caricature-like inequality. Independence from Spain did not help. They quickly turned into resource appendages of more developed countries and fell into an endless carousel of coups and revolutions. In Central America, he saw United Fruit. This was an American mega corporation that grew bananas. They had their own fleet, their own private armies. Wherever United Fruit operated, conditions were even worse than the Latin American average. It was there that Guevara was finally deeply affected. In 1953, he sent a letter home. He swore not to stop until this octopus was defeated. A month later, he arrived in Guatemala. He saw United Fruit mercenaries overthrow President Jacobo Arbenz, who tried to give land to peasants. Guevara tried to join the armed resistance, treated the wounded, but had to hide and flee. He fled to Mexico and got a job in a hospital, but could not stop thinking about the Guatemalan failure. He kept his revolutionary connections. His first wife introduced him to Cuban political exile. Cuba was ruled by Batista, who turned the island into a Disneyland for the American mafia. Guevara is introduced to two Castro brothers, Fidel and Raul, who are planning to overthrow Batista. Characteristically, the Castro brothers are also children of a major plantation owner, only Cuban rather than Argentine like Che. Their first attempt to seize power in Cuba failed, and now they are planning a second one. Characteristically, the Castro brothers are also children of a major plantation owner, only Cuban rather than Argentine like Che. Their first attempt to seize power failed, and now they are planning a second one. They have weapons, around 80 fighters, supporters on the island, and a small old yacht called Granma. An experienced instructor, a veteran of the Spanish Civil War, teaches them the art of guerrilla warfare, driving them through the mountains. The expedition lacks only a medic, and here the young Dr. Ernesto Guevara turns out to be very useful. A veteran of the Spanish Civil War teaches them the art of guerrilla warfare in the mountains. The expedition lacks only a medic, and here the young Dr. Ernesto Guevara turns out to be useful. On November 25th, 1956, he sails on the Granma toward the shores of Cuba. Everything goes wrong. The yacht was not seaworthy. Now 82 people had crowded on board. When a storm begins, they throw supplies overboard. The Granma reaches Cuba and immediately runs aground. They are discovered already during the landing. Airplanes and helicopters fire on them from the air. After 2 days, the group falls into an ambush. The group falls into a well-organized ambush and loses 60 men in a chaotic battle. For Jay, this firefight becomes the moment of truth. He throws away his medical bag and takes a crate of ammunition instead. The Castro brothers, Che, and 24 survivors flee into the Sierra Maestra mountains. Peasants shelter them. Even the revolutionaries consider guerrilla war a ridiculous fantasy, 20 men against an entire army. Batista is sure he has won, and then the unbelievable happens. The guerrilla war begins. Life in the mountains is bad. They have only heard of electricity there. Hospitals do not exist. Batista has money, soldiers, and contacts with the CIA. He lacks an explanation of how it benefits the ordinary person. The ordinary Cuban does not have much choice, either work in brothels for American tourists or this strange revolution. And Cuba chooses revolution. It cannot be said that this is easy or comfortable. At first, only the giant mosquitoes are doing well. There is a shortage of absolutely everything. Even propaganda leaflets have to be written by hand. Nevertheless, the army grows like a snowball. It is here that he develops two passions that will stay with him for life: good Cuban cigars and war. Jay becomes comandante, one of the key commanders, effectively Castro's deputy. He does everything, from military operations to building bakeries, schools, and grenade workshops. He demands flawless discipline from his men and, as much as possible, tries to educate them. He teaches them to read and write, reciting Cervantes and Treasure Island during breaks. He is merciless toward traitors, but in battle he may personally pull a wounded man out from under fire. The pinnacle of his career was a lightning maneuver that ended with the capture of Santa Clara. Batista's regime no longer resisted. Batista stuffed his airplane with money and fled. On January 2, 1959, Comandante Che Guevara entered Havana at the head of a column of revolutionaries. There he received a new post. Castro assigned him to oversee political purges. Che combined the position of commandant of the La Cabaña political prison and chairman of the Court of Appeals. Combining them was not difficult. Justice in the country was revolutionary, and this court did not overturn a single sentence anyway. Justice was revolutionary, and this court did not overturn a single sentence anyway. The first execution organized by Che was ceremonially broadcast on national television. The Comandante exchanged the trench for an office, became Minister of Finance, Minister of Industry, and was responsible for land reform. Among other things, he was president of the central bank and signed banknotes with the concise Che. Meanwhile, relations between the United States and Cuba were becoming more tense. He was responsible for land reform and signed banknotes with the concise Che. Tension with the U.S. grew. On March 4, 1960, a French ship exploded in Havana. Up to 100 people were killed. Che arrived as one of the first and personally bandaged the injured. Castro declared it a CIA attack. It was at that funeral that photographer Alberto Corda took the legendary photograph. That is how Che entered eternity, with an expression of profound sorrow and cold indignation on his face. In the photograph, he was 31 years old. He believed the island was too small for two charismatic Latin American aristocrats. Che was concerned with grand projects. Che wanted to create a new man. Castro had to think more practically. The grand projects failed. In 1962, Che admitted his industrialization plan was absurd. Food ration cards were introduced. That same year came the Cuban Missile Crisis. She was the principal architect on the Cuban side. His position was simple. If a nuclear apocalypse was necessary for liberation, let's make it happen. Why wait? American missiles in Cuba caused panic among Americans, while among Cuban revolutionaries, they caused understandable ecstasy. When Khrushchev and Kennedy negotiated instead of war, Cubans perceived it as a betrayal. After 1962, he began criticizing the USSR no less fiercely than America. The Soviets had forgotten Mark. Legend says he handed his pistol to a Soviet member and said, "Don't you want to shoot yourself?" In 1965, he delivered an aggressive speech in Algeria. Fidel reprimanded him for political immaturity. 2 weeks later, Che disappeared from public life. Castro announced he had left to fight elsewhere. He voluntarily gave up all his positions and at the same time, Cuban citizenship. January 1966, a massive summit in Havana. Delegates watched by Che's face from posters. He sent a programmatic letter from Bolivia in which he demanded the creation of 2 or 3 Vietnams. And in Bolivia, that is exactly what he was doing. Trying to ignite his own local war, but the war refused to ignite. Bolivian communists were not happy to see Guevara and interfered with his efforts to recruit people. And in Bolivia, that is exactly what he was doing, trying to ignite his own local war, but the war refused to ignite. Bolivian communists were not happy to see Guevara and interfered with his efforts to recruit people. Che had tried to master the local language, but learned the wrong one. The peasants could not understand him. There was a shortage of shoes, water, and food, just like in Cuba. This time, no miracle happened. In early October 1967, Bolivian rangers and the CIA attacked his camp. They found sick, ragged people. Che himself was captured, twice wounded and with a shattered rifle. Lyndon Johnson called it idiocy. The body had not cooled before he began turning into a revolutionary saint. Riots began everywhere. From Berlin to Santiago, the crowds marched under posters with that very photograph. Global icon.